Now, the main thing we want to be sure we understand, God always is. The psalmist goes into some detail in this. If I go to the depths of the deepest sea, thou art there. If I rise to the heights of the highest mountain, thou art there. And he asks the question, how shall I escape God's presence? Where could one flee where God is not? And we understand that if it were possible to take, say, a 15-year-old and put him on a rocket ship and send him zooming out into space, he could travel outward for 30 years and he would never pass a place where God is not, because God fills heaven and earth. But we're not describing in that a presence that has a remarkable impact. We're describing a fact. God is everywhere present. His presence cannot be escaped. That we refer to as the essential presence of God. And I don't think that there's anywhere near an adequate understanding of that even. Obviously, we're dealing with multitudes of people who never thought a single thought about the presence of God. But one can't stop having understood the essential presence. One must truly move beyond that. But that is, nonetheless, a very significant issue that needs to be understood. But we move from that essential presence, which is inescapable, to the manifest presence. And as I've sought to point out, that's when there is that felt sense, that awareness of, that presence that enables us personally to sort out who we are and to feel deeply the offensiveness of our offenses against God. Typically, when a person looks at their sin, they say, oh, well, so what? But when there is a manifest presence of God, there is no so what. There is that deep realization, oh, how could I have dared to sin against the Almighty in such a terrible, terrible way? And that, of course, is what we are ultimately seeking, that wonderful sense of the presence of God. Now, the presence of God is incredible holiness. Never a time when he slips behind a pillar and can't be found, and we can commit some foul deed and get away with it. Not even the desire for the foul deed, because he's there. He's holy, and his presence is above all else our sheer delight. Now, a season of revival is a time when heaven draws closer to earth than any other time. And so there is then that incredible sense of the nearness of God, that overwhelming spirit of holiness, of the manifest presence. So we have on one side the essential presence, on another side the perpetual manifest presence, God himself being there. And in seasons of revival, God drawing near to earth. But then we have this other area which is of utmost consequence to us. We can't make revival happen, but we can cultivate God's presence. Day by day, I can awaken with an awareness that there is a holy God, that his presence is more desirable than mountains of gold, than vast arrays of might and power. Nothing equals the presence of God. And I have the privilege of cultivating that. Every day I can remind myself that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. I can be spending my time thinking about his presence. I can be establishing patterns in life that make it clear that for me the most wonderful thing is his presence. I can cultivate it day in, day out. When things go wrong, I can disregard them, saying, even as King David said, he had set his heart to seek the Lord. And that was his first and his foremost, his greatest opportunity and desire. And so the whole church can do that. An individual has that responsibility. But the church, even though it doesn't have revival, can set its heart to cultivate God's presence. Now, obviously, if the church has abandoned the prayer meeting and decided it's not worthwhile holding it, that's a major step in saying the presence of God means nothing to us. But one way a church can cultivate God's presence is to meet together in true prayer, seeking the presence of God. And if God chooses not to send that presence in revival, at least the church can be cultivating God's presence. And obviously, our thinking about sin enters in. If I'm thinking halfway favorably about sin, I'm saying to God, well, I think that there might be some niceness in your nearness, but at the same time, I want you to know I find sin very attractive. And if I have a choice between your presence and sin, well, I'm not quite sure how I feel today. But one could come, and the church could come to that point where they said, we're done forever with the cultivation of anything and everything that has to do with this life and its corruptions. And from now on, the sole purpose of this church is to cultivate the presence of God and to seek it. He may, in his wondrous grace, send revival.